Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for a conversation we've titled MIT Experts on Real Estate and Innovation in the Digital Age, hosted by MIT Sloan Executive Education. Please let us know in the comment section where you're joining from. That helps us get a read the room since we can't see you physically. You're not in one of our classrooms right now. Helps us to kind of warm things up. I'm excited to be moderating the discussion today. My name is Christopher Palmer. I'm an associate professor of finance here at MIT Sloan, and my research focuses on real estate in many ways, everything from gentrification to regulation to valuation and things like interest rates and mortgage finance. I'm delighted to be joined today by Kate Isaacs and James Scott. Let me tell you a little bit about them and why we have them here and why they're so amazing. So Kate Isaacs is a scholar, teacher, and strategy advisor who designs organizations and stakeholder partnerships for people and places to thrive. So you can see there's a real estate connection right there, thinking about how people and places thrive. She's a senior lecturer here at MIT Sloan and draws on design thinking and system dynamics and developmental psychology to help leaders create conditions for collective intelligence, agile performance, and transformative change. That's really what MIT is about, is trying to foster transformative change. And I was really excited when I was getting ready for this and I saw that system dynamics was in her bio, because anyone that knows anything about the MIT Sloan brand knows that that's kind of our thing. That's our MO, is thinking about systems dynamics and kind of being able to see both the forest and the trees at the same time. So James Scott is Director of Industry and Professional Programs at the MIT Center for Real Estate. He's a lecturer and research scientist at the Real Estate Technology Hub. He has a primary focus on real estate automation and technology. So really thinking about like the tip of the spear and how this world is changing. He works with stakeholders, especially in prop tech. If some of you are deep in the weeds in prop tech or have kind of heard that buzzword, we're going to demystify it a little bit today. So he works with people in the prop tech sector, identifying technologies that will make anything from thinking about making buildings more efficient to more competitive and better for the end user to kind of drive their value proposition. He teaches classes here at MIT on innovation and prop tech and entrepreneurship at MIT. So welcome to the conversation, both of you, Kate and James. I know you've been thinking about this event for a little while now. So before we dive into some of the substantive content around innovation in real estate, let me give you a chance to add anything else you would think should be in the preamble, whether connections between your background and our conversation today that I missed, or maybe what excites you about what's happening with real estate here at MIT.
James, you want to dive in first?
Oh, there it is. Put me under the spotlight. Thanks, Kate. Chris, first of all, thanks so much for having this, hosting us today, and really looking forward to this conversation between the three of us. If I was to add anything, one of the one of the bases behind this conversation is a new program at MIT, which is of course the new executive education program based on the changing landscape in real estate. And that's kind of the basis of where a lot of our thinking has come from. And where I'm going with that is, please forgive me if I go on a little bit of a ramble here, but the reality is that, work from home is nothing new. All right. In that, we'd seen many of that. We'd seen that dynamic across the board for a number of years pre-COVID. And then when COVID came along, it sent everybody back to their house, and it changed the whole fabric of, we'll call it the office environment. And it changed the whole fabric of what work really is. And we started to delve into what are the tasks, what do people really want, what does productivity really look like? And over the last, we'll call it 5 years, the questions that have kind of coincide with that, and with the drive to push everybody back to office space and all the secondary effects that come with that, still haven't been answered. In fact, in lots of ways, the kind of the questions have just got bigger and more expansive and created more issues. And we read, I think, probably every 2 to 3 months that there's a huge drive to push back to the office. And then the next thing you read in the newspapers that, actually people have had enough of that and they're fighting back, and that the talent was to push back. And so I think a lot of the users of space, and for that, I mean, on the demand side, they found themselves in a very unique position over the last few years where they still really haven't figured out what it is that people really want and how to best use it. And through trial and error and through a number of different things, they've seen things work and they've seen things fail. But the reality is, there's still no set plan, and there's still no footprint or, step-by-step guide as how to get this right. And I think, one of the great things about what we try to have through this conversation is kind of set the foundation for a lot of people, is to try and figure out where does it all go from here.
I love that. So I'm reminded of this quote that something about New York City real estate, like the demise of New York City real estate has been written almost every decade. Like every shock that happens, every stock market crash, every terrorist event, every pandemic, it's like, well, that's it. No one's ever going to want to buy and use real estate in New York City anymore. And I sometimes feel like we're caught between this whiplash of these two extremes of like, well, that's it. Work from home, the world for real estate is over, game is ended, versus like, oh, come on, this is overblown. This happens all the time. It's going to be business as usual. And I kind of see everything you said as saying, let's be very deliberate and opportunistic and figure out where we're going instead of just figuring out, being tossed about from one headline extreme to the other headline extreme. And so I really see what we're trying to talk about today is like, let's talk about the issues, the concepts and the content that allows us to be grounded, deliberate, and kind of take the bull by the horns and say, okay, maybe the world hasn't changed 100%, but it certainly hasn't changed 0%. And there's an opportunity for people who are aware of what's going on, aware of what the trends are, and aware of how to take advantage of that. So great intro. Kate, do you have anything to add on our preamble?
Well, I just want to welcome everyone who's joined us. Sarah Jane was the first one to jump in and say that you're coming from Trinidad and Tobago. So welcome. We've got people from Denmark and Maryland and Italy and Saudi and India, Italy, Guatemala, all over the place. A lot of folks from the US and internationally. So welcome. Thanks for coming to spend this hour with us. And we have some questions that we're going to go through, and we want you to put your questions in chat. So we'll be monitoring that. And our folks in the background will be also teeing up some of those for our attention. So please put in your questions, comments. We love to hear from you. Just a few words about my background is I am going to be, as you will see in this conversation, holding down the humanistic approach to what we're going to be talking about. So I'm a social psychologist by training. I've done a lot of work on distributed leadership, which is essentially how do you take the corporate hierarchy that usually looks like this, where the smart people are here at the top, supposedly having all the answers and driving them down through the corporate hierarchy. Well, that's often too slow and bureaucratic to deal with our fast changing world. So I teach and advise leaders how to flip that upside down so that they create an innovation game board where innovation is continuous and senior leaders are actually enabling and designing spaces, cultures, systems for everybody to step up and lead. And that's really the only way that you get a kind of responsiveness, intentionality, and strategic responsiveness that James and Christopher were just talking about, instead of just being blown by the winds of strategy. Instead of being blown by the winds of the world, then you can be more intentional if you have a lot of people stepping up and leading in ways that are appropriate. So that's been a lot of my work. And I've also done a lot of work in communities, helping business leaders figure out how to lead locally in ways that strengthen local talent pipelines, forging relationships with community colleges and other universities, but not just four-year universities, apprenticeship programs, workforce development agencies, so that they're helping to train the talent of the future, talent that's digitally literate, aware, ready to use AI, because there's some research out showing that folks who are in kindergarten today will be entering jobs that don't even exist today. So we all have to be able to be nimble and to be able to respond in strategic ways to the fast changing world we live in.
I love it, Kate. It's like tantalizing to hear you talk about those concepts and to know that over the course of the next little bit, we're going to get to talk about the connections between those concepts and real estate and what that means for real estate practitioners. So great. Okay, let's honor this commitment to talk about technology and what's changing digitally. So James, let me start with the first question to you. Thinking about the emerging technologies that are the emerging technologies du jour, like AI, Internet of Things, digital twins, thinking about all of these kind of new frontiers, how does that actually affect real estate? So how does that change in your mind how leaders should think about physical space or workplace design? And I'd love, especially if you can take us out of the clouds and be concrete and give us some real world examples about how this is playing out.
Sure. So I think, just the technologies you mentioned there, like AI, IoT, digital twin, which is a personal favorite of mine. I think they're fundamentally reshaping how business leaders probably conceptualize and design the physical workspaces. That's not to say that they haven't gone through. And for those of you who are on this call, who work deep in the weeds of real estate, I want to say something just to kind of get that out there a little bit quickly, is that a lot of these concepts you've heard before, and yet you've been told that they're going to make huge, grandiose changes across the realms of the industry, but yet you haven't really necessarily seen those changes over the last few years. Specifically, something like digital twin or IoT, even IoT. It's taken a long time for it to really kind of, we'll call it, create a standardization that you're starting to see the true benefits from that. But these innovations really are moving beyond the basic automation to create, so I was going to say intelligent, but I won't use that word. I'm going to say smart, sort of responsive environments that really are starting to adapt to human behavior, and then fundamentally from that optimize the space utilization then in real time within a lot of the space that people use and across the portfolios that people then work within that space. AI, of course, is the big word. Specifically, generative AI is the technology that's on everybody's mind at the minute. And this really is revolutionizing workspace design. And it does this through fundamentally data-driven analysis that captures the fast changing needs in the different dynamics of work, and specifically even in hybrid work models. And rather than, let's say, relying on traditional assumptions of space usage, AI systems are really starting to, what they can do is they can analyze vast amounts of data from, we'll call, on the other side, IoT systems or different Wi-Fi access points or building management systems, to really understand how people within those spaces are using the spaces that they're in. Some really kind of interesting examples that you've seen over the last kind of few years to be built out. I think Microsoft, they've done a wonderful job with their smart building innovation, specifically maybe at their headquarters, where they've partnered with other companies like Innerspace to transform a lot of their data programs into really actionable insights that allows them to better understand how their employees are using common, like let's say simple things like common areas or kitchens, or actually the space within the buildings, that can give them a far better understanding of the optimization. And then from that, of course, what you have is a significant cost savings that kind of coincide within that. I think other teams that are using it very well are someone like JLL, who have an AI implementation system that's really starting to utilize empirical evidence for data-driven space decisions. Their tools really are optimizing, employee movement patterns and we'll call it interaction data that suggests, that let's say what are the best designs to promote the most efficient layouts, ultimately leading to, of course, increased employee satisfaction or user satisfaction, and then again, reduced operational costs.
So can I jump in and make sure I'm getting this right? So I'm imagining Microsoft's use case or JLL's use case. There might be a break room that they haven't realized is basically wasted space because nobody uses it because it's awkwardly situated and it doesn't have amenities. And there might be another break room that's like actually inundated with people using it, or a conference room that's useful and a conference room that's not. And when you get Internet of Things data back, you start to realize, geez, this particular space is the MVP space in the entire building. And this other particular space, we ought to repurpose it or renovate it or fix it up because it's just people are showing us with their feet. It's not useful.
Absolutely. But it's also better from that understanding what's causing that. All right, because you can see it in the data. I'm going to give you simple things. So let's say you have a manager who's sitting in an office outside of an open work environment. All right, but that manager is sitting outside with an office that has a glass facade and can see out onto everything. And there's a break room beside that glass facade. All right, that break room mightn't necessarily get too much usage. Why? Because people don't necessarily want to be seen taking a break in front of their manager. And so the data that comes with it, we also have to better understand what's the reason taking place. Other elements, like simple things like heating systems. Like, is there a radiator there that's producing too much heat that makes it an uncomfortable environment for people to actually walk away from? They just don't want to be around that. And so there's all of these little intricate elements within spaces that people, even nothing to do with even optimization, seeing that people are coming in or coming out, but whether or not, why is the space not been utilized in the way that it should be? Because space is simply too expensive. It costs too much to hold all these things and not getting the most amount of usage out of it. And you're starting to see that. And coinciding with one of the other technologies that we mentioned earlier, which was digital twin, it's one thing to have all of this data, and it's one thing to have all of these AI capabilities. But what digital twin does, and what a digital twin is very simplistically, is a 3D virtual replica of a particular space. And we've seen this, in a number of different iterations before, be it in car manufacturing or energy manufacturing, or in different industries. But imagine that with a 3D virtual replica of a building. And then what you can do is, you can facilitate a situation where you can simulate different models using different technologies, using different systems, using different HVAC systems, different space layout, to see what would happen if you put something else into that situation. And that's something very unique that we haven't really been able to do before with real estate, because you can't, there is no R&D budget for changing up a space. When you take on a space, it costs too much to run, sort of a trial and error situation. You get your TI at the start of your lease. Essentially the entire floor is built out to cater to your needs. But until you're actually in that environment and using it, you don't really know how it's going to work. So what a digital twin scenarios can do is it can create a situation that you can simulate or forecast based on the data that you have, to know exactly what would happen or is most likely to happen in certain scenarios. And that in itself is a technology that I think people are starting to really starting to see the use case now, and the true value of where it can actually take us.
I love it. I love that concept of a digital twin. It reminds me of a story my grandmother told me. So they built a house later in their life, and she's very, very proud of this house and how it was designed. And I was asking her, like, it seems like every light switch even is in the right place. And that's my grandmother, very fastidious. And she said that she took the blueprints, which are 2D, and she walked with her fingers and imagined you came into a room. From this room, you would want access to this light switch that was going to do this thing. And it seems like digital twin makes it so that you don't have to be my fastidious grandmother rocking with your fingers through space, imagining what it would be like, but you get to just kind of render the whole thing and figure this out in a much less clunky way than you had to 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And rendering is only one part, but it's a nice idea to have all of this imagery and facilitate with that. But having the data behind it, of the past and present data, to better, to really understand what is working, what isn't, that's the real value as well. In fact, in some cases, a lot of the digital twin concept that you see are trying to move away from the visualization element of it, because it actually is one of the more difficult parts of the technology, trying to merge that into the data. And better understanding actually is what is this data really showcasing to me, and what value can I get out of that if I create these different scenarios and different forecasts. Super cool.
Okay, so that's really drilling down. Kate, help us be a little bit more zooming out to think about the role of a corporate manager that has trying to develop a holistic real estate strategy, not just one that narrowly thinks about, okay, we're going to have this build out and we're going to have this number of employees, and so we need this square footage, but a strategy that connects space and technology and really connects people with the larger business goals of the enterprise.
Yeah, well, I will respond to that. And I just want to say that your conversation, the two of you just now, illustrates what we are talking about, which is this intersection between human, what your grandmother used to do, digital and the digital twin, and the physical space. And we keep seeing over and over again that these three intersecting circles really need to come together in a thoughtful way, so that it's just not we're focusing on one at the expense of the others, or not seeing the connections among them. So I would start off the answer to your question, Chris, by just saying that, first of all, when you think about holistic strategy, you have to just start by thinking about all three of the bubbles. And starting to think about playing out in one's mind, okay, say I do an RTO. How is that going to, that's a human strategy. I'm going to have my people in the office, whatever it is, say 5 days a week. Now, how is that going to affect other dimensions of the human strategy? And why am I doing that? So, and then how is that ultimately going to play into the technology that I have or don't have? And are there different ways to accomplish my strategic goals using technology instead of having to order bodies back into the space, which may have unintended consequences? So I would say first thing is just start to think about the implications in all three bubbles. And
own the responsibility of not being siloed and thinking about all three of those. That is the job of a corporate manager, is to be thinking about all of those things, not just narrowly their function.
Well, it should be. However, We know from recent reports that a third of bosses admit that they're pushing RTO because they're upset about seeing all these empty cubicles, and they can't stand the idea of that. Or they have a mental model that in order to be innovative and to be productive, we need to have bodies in the office 5 days a week. Well, depending on your industry, your business, you may need to have people in the office 5 days a week, but it also may be that you could do quite well with a hybrid strategy, which is where we're seeing a lot of companies go. Now, I don't know if people on the line are large owners of real estate or in the real estate industry on the more of the supply side, but the same thing holds true, is that you have to use think holistically and then use data to test your assumptions. And I think that's one thing that the three of us have had a lot of great conversations around is, for instance, you might have a hypothesis, for instance, that an RTO mandate of 5 days a week would be good for your company. Okay, hold that as a hypothesis. And that's, I think, what we really encourage people to do at MIT. Don't just go on your gut instinct. Have a hypothesis and then go collect some data around it. So there was an interesting study that came out by trip.com. It was actually published in Nature, which is a very prestigious journal, where they ran an experiment where one set of employees was ordered back to the office 5 days a week. And then there was another set that was ordered to use a hybrid model. And people thought that the hybrid model would on average reduce productivity by 2.6%. In fact, when they went and collected data on it, the hybrid model increased productivity by 1%. And they experienced 35% lower attrition in the hybrid workforce population. So I would say when you're thinking about developing a strategy for around return to office or anything, try it out, run an experiment, collect some data. And here's the really important thing: be willing to be wrong. That's why we have something called the null hypothesis. Did you prove your hypothesis right or wrong? And you can bring your curiosity to it and have fun with it, instead of having to be stuck in, I have the right answer and I'm unwilling to collect data around it. No, go test your hypothesis. And that's how you get good strategy, is you have some hypotheses, you do your homework, you do your sense making, which is something we talk a lot about at MIT. And then you try a few things, you experiment in ways that are small and safe, and you get some more data so that you then can get ahead of your competitors that way.
I love it. You're totally illustrating what we think about at MIT, and this idea that we want to basically apply the scientific method. I mean, that is, we don't have every single discipline at MIT. We're an institute, not a university. And the thing that does join all of the disciplines together that we do have at MIT is use of the scientific method. So that's what we are about. And so thinking about how that shapes our strategy and just trying to be integrative in all that we do and think about the whole system in a holistic way is great. It's great. It's exactly what we should be about. So we're playing to our type, as we say in economics.
Chris, can I just jump in for a quick question?
Jump in.
Okay, I saw that study, and I had a great conversation with a couple of, we'll call it Boston-based CEOs types. They primarily work in tech. And they were looking at this, and then I was showcasing this particular thing. And to say it caused an argument, and it caused an argument like I haven't been in for quite some time, because they're just like, there's just no way that somebody who's sitting at home on a Friday is as productive as they are normally if they're in the office. And they're just not buying it, even when it's put in front of them with empirical evidence. And there's different conversations that coincide with that, in that might be the case. They might not necessarily be on a Friday because life, whether they're leaving their kids off to sports, or there's something else that's going on, but they can become more productive in other ways at different parts during the time. So they're not commuting, all right, and then, or they're working, between, because they're not commuting, they're not as tired, and so they might work between 7 and 9, and they ultimately end up not just recuperating those hours, but in some cases even being more productive at certain times as well. But that all coincides back to all of the things that I rely on you from, which is that individual and understanding, that individual in the corporate sphere. And I think it's going to be a big part of where a lot of this goes in the future of work, where organizations are going to look at personality and the types of personalities that a person are within the realms of work to see how they can actually can they maintain a sort of a productivity when there's not somebody standing over their shoulder? And that's something I think a lot of businesses are trying to kind of look at as well at the minute, because as you know yourself, there are different people work in different ways, and some people react very well to when there's somebody in the room. Like, I'll give an example. Like, I mean, the likes of a stock trader, like, I mean, in New York, on the floor, they're in the pit and they're kind of screaming at each other and they're screaming on down the telephone. They're trying to get things done. And they actually, as a personality type, work better in that environment, because when they see the person next to them do a deal for, you know, I mean, $10 million,
it motivates them.
It spurs them on. They kind of go, hold on, I need to do this and I need to do more. But there are a lot of other individuals across the world, like, I mean, that don't react in the same way, and they, you know, their personality kind of they kind of come into themselves. They don't necessarily work in that type of environment. And so, you know, it's trying to better. This is where the human aspect of all the things that we're talking about. It's not just the space and the design, but individuals themselves and the culture then that's created for them. Like, I mean, and it makes this such a really incredibly interesting conversation.
Yeah, that's a great segue into what I was going to ask you next, James, because if I think about the mindset of those Boston-based CEOs that are just kind of like, darn it, we need people back in the office and we need them back now. Part of that is becoming because they've got this sunk cost fallacy. They feel like they're renting all this space and darn it, they're going to get their money's worth, and they don't want to be wasting all of that. And so that's coming from this old view of real estate is just a cost. It's just a cost center. It's just one of those things you have to pay for, even though it doesn't drive revenue, like HR. You know, darn it, I've got to pay my landlord. And I think what you're talking about is thinking more about real estate as a strategic asset too, where you kind of move beyond just thinking of it as something I have to have, unfortunately, but more, how can it drive innovation, equity, organizational change, and growth? How do you think about real estate kind of being more of a strategic asset than a cost?
Great question. For me, I think for a lot of the top companies and organizations out there, real estate has really gone through a fundamental shift of, you know, from being viewed merely as a, you know, as you said, as an overhead, to not just a strategic asset, but more a strategic weapon for organizational success. And I mean, and there's several factors that kind of coincide that, but primarily what that does is it facilitates a number of things, and a catalyst for, let's say, innovation or a growth and productivity within the organization. And that starts with that human element, which is talent attraction and retention, because, you know, and culture that comes with that. And I'm going to use a very personal kind of element that coincides with this. And this is very much at the rudimentary starts, but I saw, you know, during the months of COVID, when my own wife, she worked from home for an organization over the course of, you know, the last couple of years. And after a year, she'd been in the office once. All right. And I said, you know, I asked her, like, how is she getting on? Is she enjoying it? She was doing her work and she was doing fine, but she could have been working for anywhere. She didn't, like, I mean, and if somebody had come in with a better offer or something like that, I think she would think about it for about 0.2 seconds and have no problem moving along. And, you know, we're seeing, you know, in crazy things, I'm just going to throw this out there because it's front page news, but, you know, not everybody's getting the $250 million offer from Mark Zuckerberg in the Post. Okay, I get that. But talent retention, especially in today's world, like, where you understand, like, people who are good and can achieve great success and can bring your company to the next level, you need to have a place for them to feel at home and to want to be part of it. And that curates that through obviously with design and collaboration, but there's so many other factors as well that coincide with that, with wellness, even simple things like that. And so I think you see a lot of large organizations start to better understand, what do I need to curate an environment that makes people not just feel part of this organization, but be proud of it. And I often use a very simple thing, but here in Boston, when, you know, one of the things when I came to Boston, whatever, 10 years ago, that threw me a little bit, I just didn't understand it, was, you know, you go for a run down the Esplanade. If anyone knows this city, there's a beautiful Esplanade here, and you go for a run on it. And everybody wears their colors. Everybody says, you know, MIT, Harvard, Northeastern, what's called BU, or whatever university you went to. All right. And there's a sense of pride and attachment to that, and people have it for life. And I think a lot of organizations are starting to realize that they want to instill at where they are as an organization into the people, to retain the talent and get them to be part of it. Go, hold on, you know, the same way we saw Google do this originally in kind of the 2000s. Yeah. I mean, you're a Googler. All right. And people were proud to say it because, like, I mean, they knew you were making great money. You were part of an incredible organization. That kind of lost its way a little bit over the course of time. But like when you start to see, I mean, even the co-branding now, the branding of organizations, people, people want a sense of pride. They want a sense of belonging. They want to be part of something in certain cases bigger than themselves.
Yeah, and I completely see what you're saying about how physical place accomplishes that and makes that kind of fit and that bond between organization and kind of workforce. So Kate, we're talking about mindset changes is one way to think about this. Are there other mindset changes that you think are kind of like important for thinking about how people need to change when they think about real estate in the future?
Well, I would just tag on to what James was saying, and I would say, I'll be provocative and say that of these three domains, human, physical, and digital, you've got to center your people first. That's actually the most important thing. And unless you do that, unless you have a humanistic approach to what you're trying to do in business, yes, we are in business. We want to make money. However, these days, people are looking, as James was talking about, for a sense of well-being, meaning in their lives. We know from a lot of decades of psychological research that people essentially want four things: autonomy. We want the freedom to design our own lives, including our work lives, at least to some degree. We want purpose, a sense of meaning and purpose for our lives. And that's individual to each of us. But it really helps if we're working for an organization that's also purposeful, that's about making money, yes, but also is trying to contribute something positive to the world or the communities that we live in. So autonomy, purpose, mastery. We want to be able to have a chance to better ourselves. We human beings are wired for learning. We want to improve ourselves and gain mastery over whatever it is that we're doing. And then finally, belonging. And this is what James was talking about. We want to feel like we belong to something bigger than ourselves. Sometimes that's at work. Some people just want a paycheck and they want to go home and they want to find a sense of belonging with their family or their church or community, and that's fine. But it's really important for leaders everywhere to understand that this is how human beings are wired. And I think, Chris, we are well past the days where we are just expecting people to show up and put up with crappy working conditions and managers or leaders who don't care about them as people and expect them to perform at their best. We know way too much about human psychology, and we know we have a lot of examples from the corporate world where companies are really doing quite a good job at helping provide those four things for people. So, if we think about centering people, which are the limiting factor, finding good people is harder than ever these days. So if we center that as business leaders in the equation, and then think about how to have technology enable people's productivity, including all the ones that we're talking about. I mean, we've all got AI now, and that is something we should all be using. We should all be using AI. And the people who are using AI will be able to outperform the people who aren't. So we've got to teach people how to use it and use it well. And we should all be using it in all of our business decisions and using it wisely. It's not a replacement for ethics. And then the physical space, as James was talking about, how can that be designed to enable people to perform at their very best? People are hard. Humans are complicated. And it's not easy to figure out the way to get the best out of each of us, but we know a lot about how to do it. It's not a total black box. And if you center people first, if you pay attention to those four things that people really want, then you're way ahead of the game in terms of your talent and attraction and retention strategy. And you're going to be able to be more competitive and get the best talent and keep them. So I'll stop there. I have a few other points, but maybe those will come out as we.
This is great. I'm going to throw you a curveball, James. Throughout this conversation, I've been thinking that it fits really well with the office food group of real estate. But can you help me brainstorm some of the ways that we're kind of centering humans is important to residential and to industrial and to hospitality and to retail? What do you think about porting some of these lessons that work really well when we're thinking about the productivity of a worker, and thinking about why those lessons are also really important in other real estate genres?
So I'm going to take a very strange example. Sorry.
I've got a strange example too, so let's hear your strange example first.
But a very good example of this is retail. Retail went through what we'll call, a significant shift over the last, we'll say, 12 to 15 years with the change in e-commerce, which all facilitated, of course, that growth in infrastructure, in supply chain, and then warehousing and industrial as well, which boomed. But we'll say for 12, for argument's sake, that e-commerce 15 years, e-commerce has changed retail. And that we'll call it that food group within the real estate world, had to go through a complete change of understanding of who its people were, and who its clients were, who its customers were, and what it needed to produce in order to be a productive asset again. And we're starting to see that actually retail in certain aspects not in all. So the suburban shopping mall in some ways is dead in lots of places. In some places it's gone very well, if it's well centered. Certain Class A retail here in cities is gone through the roof. It's doing better than it ever did. And places like here, Newbury Street, Fifth Avenue, Madison Avenue, New York, Bond Street, they're seeing a revitalization that they've never seen before, but they've curated it in a new way to create this word. Some people don't like it, but that experience for people so that people want to go there, because ultimately human nature meant that they still wanted to go shopping. They didn't want to just do it all online. They wanted to touch it. They wanted to feel it. But it took a long time to navigate through all of that human understanding. And so I think that's a really wonderful example to showcase with something like office, which is going through a significant shift right now. And even something like this program, what it does is it kind of gives you the tools to be able to better understand how to navigate those choppy waters in a faster and quicker way. And I think there's an awful lot of value to be learned for something like retail over the last few years, especially with office, to say, hold on, is there something that we can learn from there that we can bring here that can make that change, that shift, faster and quicker? And you mentioned, New York earlier on. New York has been dead how many times? At least once every 10 to 15 years over the last 60, 70 years. Don't ever bet against New York. It reinvents itself like no city in the world, and it has done it incredibly well. And that's what it's understanding those things. What allows that repurposing and that recreation? Quite honestly, personally, I don't feel that the repurposing of office space to residential will get the huge shift that people, certainly the media has built it up. Even looking at Gensler, their reports were only 4% of buildings in most cities is a space that can actually be repurposed that way.
Right.
What are the other options? What can we do with this? How do we change the space to make it a more productive environment for organizations? And from that, it creates a filter effect to all of these secondary elements within it, which is the retail on the ground, the multifamily that's built in the cities, the transportation network of cities. What's required to do that? Because it's still a case, even in places, in certainly a lot of the Eastern Seaboard, that people are going to the office only, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Very easy to navigate the cities on Mondays and Fridays, but what does that do for a transportation network?
Yeah.
So there's all of these incredible secondary kind of effects that coincide with these.
And as I think about that, what do I want to do in each of those other settings besides just office? I want to do the same thing Kate was talking about wanting to do in the office space. I want to center humans, think about them first. What do they need? Those humans could be, by the way, could be customers, could be suppliers, could be employees, right? And then I want to use the scientific method, that kind of centering humans, thinking about their needs. That gives me the theory, that gives me the hypothesis that then I want to go out, get data to test and be able to refine and execute on. So that's great. Great. So I let you bleed into this, James. So let me just ask it this way. We've been talking a bunch and kind of dancing around this. If you were just kind of making a list of the top innovations in real estate, what do you see as being the most fundamental kind of seismic shifts of late?
Okay, there's no getting away from AI. AI is changing everything. And the data that's been built up around it, and the amount of data that's available to really garner insight. But in saying that, and especially within the realms of real estate, people have to better understand what the AI's capabilities really are. And it's you have to there's a real sense of understanding and educating yourself as to its true capabilities, because I think a lot of people get this kind of thrown by the fact that it's not necessarily magic, and it's not in a lot of cases it's not necessarily either intelligence either. It's really smart insight, and it can really help facilitate you making better, smarter decisions. So that for me is a huge thing that we're going to see more and more of in so many different systems, and that can be across the board. even something as simple as property management, which I do a lot of work in. Like a lot of the property management tools out there already, in multifamily, their AI systems allow you to manage somewhere close to 100 doors per property manager. They're working off the basis that in 3 years' time, that number will be closer to somewhere between 750 to 1,000 doors per property manager, and that's what they're aiming for. That's what their R&D teams are working for. And but here's the thing: they don't necessarily even have to get to that number. Even if they double it from 100 to 200, it's still a game-changing kind of effect within that. Personally, I love concepts like digital twin. I think there's immense value in it, especially for something like real estate, which is just too hard to run kind of, an R&D project off. There is no R&D for a lot of research or for in real estate in lots of different areas. So this is something that can really help that. And it can help it in a number of ways, from space optimization, from energy efficiency, which is a huge one, especially if you're here in a lot of, the East Coastern cities where you have local law 97 in New York, you have the Borough laws here in Boston, where regulation is going to become much more impactful from energy usage over the next few years. That's hugely important, I think, as well. I also, I have to say, I love this concept of digital rights through Web 3.0. I'm not sure if you've come across this, but this is the concept, for a lot of real estate owners out there. Like, let's say you owned, well, it's easy to say something like the Empire State, but let's say a very prominent building in Bryant Park, or somewhere like a very prominent building in like the Salesforce Tower in San Francisco. Imagine in 2 or 3 years' time, where ultimately you're wearing Google glasses, which are starting to find its feet again with their capabilities. And when you're walking past that building, you, Chris, you see an ad for Coca-Cola on its facade. All right, but Kate, she likes Pepsi, so it's curated to her and to her individual taste, and she sees Pepsi. I like Mountain Dew, so I see Mountain Dew. It's a little bit along the lines of, if you've ever seen Minority Report, where it registers and understands your retina and takes your individual tastes, which, by the way, all of that information they already have, through your Gmail, through your Instagram, through your social media, and they curate an advertising campaign towards you when you walk past certain buildings, and how that can kind of coincide. And then from an internal perspective within a building, curating a specific building kind of analysis onto your personal likes as well. So you walk through a space and it curates to how you like things, be it from a temperature perspective, from a lighting perspective, to make it the most productive kind of capability and efficient space for you in order to achieve what you need to do.
That's a fun vision of a future, maybe not so far off future. That's great. Okay, so Kate, we're talking about these innovations. Is this kind of conversation what you could expect people to take away from our upcoming MIT Exec Ed course, Shaping the Future of Real Estate? I know you've been working a lot. James has too. I've been part of that conversation in designing that. What can executives plan? What can they expect to get out of that?
Well, I think there are 3 things, and I've been at MIT for 22 years, so and I love being here. I am absolutely passionate about what we do here, and I think there's a handful of things. I'll say there's a lot of them, but I'll narrow them down to 3 in terms of what people will get out of this course. One is that I mentioned this term sense making earlier. It was a term coined by the social psychologist Carl Weick many years ago. Sense making is exactly what the term might indicate, which is you go out, it's a complicated, very fast changing world, and you try to make sense of what's happening and tell a story about it. So one thing that people will do, and we will be actively encouraging people to do, is to go out and do their own sense making, because I like to say innovation is a conversation between you and the world. So you might have a fantastic idea about, how to make curated, individualized spaces like James was just talking about. But if no one's going to buy it, if you can't get the technology to work, or, something like that, then it's not going to work. So you have to marry your good idea with the sense making into the world about what's going on out there. What do people want? What do your customers want? What technologies are coming down the pike that might apply, either outcompete your business or enable your business idea to work better? So we teach people about that, and people will do tours on campus. We've got the most innovative square mile on the planet, some people say, here in Kendall Square, where MIT is, and lots of labs and centers, and we're very interdisciplinary. Second thing is, you'll learn how to do that data-driven scientific method with regard to your own industry. And you'll be with a bunch of people who all care about the same things in the same industry. So what does a good hypothesis look like? How do you test it? How do you collect data on it in a way that's efficient and effective? How do you find the positive outliers in your own industry or even in your own company and learn from them? So some of those tools and technologies, and I know, Chris, you're on deck to teach some of that work around looking at the whole, financial analysis and real estate portfolio ends of things. And then the third thing I would say is we are such a diverse community. You're going to meet people from all over the world who are all grappling with the same challenges and problems that you are. And I like to say that you're going to learn as much from your peers in these programs as you will from the faculty. And that's really true. There are just not many places where people come together from really all over the world to learn together and to dig into these problems and challenges. So there's a lot of peer coaching, and people come away with really lifelong friendships. It's so inspiring. Plus, we feed you really well. We have really good food, so let's not forget that.
I love all those things about the MIT classroom as well. I feel like it's a place where we always have the latitude to zoom out and look at the kind of bigger picture. And so I do that every single time I teach a case study in the classroom. It might be narrowly about the financing decision that like this hotel chain was making with their properties. But before we do that, we jump out and we talk about their competitive situation, and we talk about their trends and their customers and how they're doing on a bunch of different dimensions. And that kind of overall thinking always informs a better job when we then turn to the particular question that might have on the face of it seemed narrow. And I'll also say that what happens inevitably during that big discussion about the big picture is we just end up drawing on the diversity of the room, because people in the room will say, oh, well, I actually worked for a hotel chain, or, oh, actually, I was more on the like city side. I worked for the city of Philadelphia, and here's what I had to deal with. And someone will say, well, I was actually in charge of helping a multinational expand in my country, and they're talking about their particular local context. And you sum all of those things together, and you just come away wildly better informed and prepared to dominate the particular demonstration that you have.
Chris, can I just add on that? Like, I mean, one of the most incredible things about MIT is that it provides an environment for you to create how you see the world, and I mean, a change of mindset for a lot of individuals, especially for those, let's say, coming from the world of real estate. Because, and here's an example that I've often given to Kate over the different conversations we've had, is that the mindset in real estate is very unique in that it's not like technology, it's not like finance, where you can fail and you can fail and you can fail and you can fail, and then suddenly you win, right? And you're on the front cover of Forbes magazine and you're a billionaire and everybody loves you and thinks you're the smartest person that ever existed. Real estate doesn't allow you to do that. You have to get it right. You have to get it right. You have to get it right. And so it creates a very risk-averse kind of mentality, because if you get it wrong, all right, the expense is so vast, and suddenly your investors are not coming back to you. Suddenly your C-suite is looking at your position and saying, did you make the right decision here? And so this creates a very different mindset, I think, which is extremely helpful in the face of so many different issues that have actually quite simply have never seen before. Like, I mean, within this industry. And it also, Kate said something really great earlier. It kind of gives you an environment where you are allowed to fail. Not that failure is a good thing, but it allows you to fail forward, which is a really, really valuable kind of element with a lot of this, because a lot of this it's new and it's changing. And even by the time we start this course, at the end of October, what the knowledge that we have and the changing capabilities of certain technologies will have already changed even from this time around. So that there's some of the kind of the best parts of coming on board, to being on campus in a very, very unique landscape that allows you to kind of just think a little bit differently than you get to in the corporate world.
I was thinking as you were sharing that about how we were very deliberate when we were crafting this, that we didn't want to just cater to developers or to investors, but you can imagine that developers and investors and brokers and operators and service providers and people that have real estate as a function, as part of a large corporate strategy, that they're all going to take something away from this, because the principles we're talking about are going to be applicable across those functions. Great. Okay, so I have a couple audience questions that I want to ask you both. So one interesting one came in from Nicholas. I'm going to ask you this, James. How will AI app builders like Replit and Lovable and things like that affect the real estate industry? How can you imagine that playing out?
I think there are, by the way, so I work very much in the prop tech sphere. I work with a lot of startups. There are so many AI applications already within the realms of the real estate industry. The difference is that a lot, and this kind of comes out, I'm going to use an example. We had a lot of fintech investors in different companies over the last few years trying to merge over into the realms of prop tech with some limited success, but in most cases not very well. There's a very different, the real estate industry is very nuanced, and quite simply for a number of different reasons. The data is completely different. It's different from city to city. It's a non-scalable asset in lots of respects, and from and so what happens in New York on Park Avenue is completely different to, let's say, Kansas or even London or in San Francisco. So you have to work with it. AI works really well when you're dealing with the exact same situation over and over again. And so you have to see that, you have to know that you're working with an application that understands the nuances that coincide with that, and from that also the stakeholder complexity within a city environment or a portfolio environment as well. So from that, I think there are some really great real estate focused AI applications out there. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of the AI generic ones that come into play, because I think they lose a little bit of play along the ground on it. But there's some really, really good ones, and more than happy to answer other questions offline on which ones I think are. I don't want to sell different companies on.
Sure. I mean, I was just thinking about the ability to just have AI generate an app for you and to do a lot of that legwork also facilitates an app that allows you to kind of control and manage and get data from your particular real estate asset very, very quickly. And so you can have a customized app that facilitates a lot of the kind of synthesis that you're talking about that's bespoke to your situation.
Absolutely. But if you take it on a kind of, let's say, a portfolio level, there is different nuances based on location. Location is location is always the adage behind real estate at the end of the day. And that's still extremely important within that, because the data that's available in, let's say, in New York versus Chicago versus London is extremely different as well. So you have to know that the product that you're working with has an understanding and uses that in lots of different ways. And I've seen some that are successful. I've seen more that are not. So, there's still some really, really good ones. But it depends on the task that you're trying to achieve.
Right. Okay, Kate, here's one that I'm going to aim at you. So Tom asks, what if about the considerations, let's think about these return to office considerations. What if you took organizations that have cost savings from reducing their real estate footprint? Is there a way to kind of keep retention by distributing that to help workers fund their home offices through a home office type credit?
Wow, that's such an interesting idea. I wonder if anyone is doing that. Now, Tom, you got me curious. I'm going to go look that up after this. I'm sure somebody out there must be experimenting with something like that. I love that idea, because what you're doing is you're recognizing that you really have to engage people, your employees, and recognize that they too have power and autonomy of choice. And so if you want to motivate them, you have to maybe think about how to dangle some more carrots in front of them and help them share in the cost savings of this whole great experiment of RTO that we're all engaged in. So I really love that idea. And I think it also picks up on a couple of the other comments that are in chat from Lucy talking about autonomy, and also Fatima mentioning autonomy and trusting people with ownership of their work. And yes, I think this idea of cultivating an ownership mindset among your employees. So you help them think about, how can I be an entrepreneur who owns a little piece of what we're trying to do as a company to make us all successful? And the more that you can engage them in the process, help them share in the success of the enterprise. And, I think, as Tom was saying, to distribute some of the cost savings is a great way to encourage that ownership mindset. there are a lot of companies who are experimenting with that. In fact, we have a new video series called Leaders at All Levels. You can find it on YouTube. It's hosted by the MIT Sloan Management Review, where we're interviewing CEOs and others who are creating these kinds of organizations where people do have high autonomy and high ownership. And contrast that with a conversation I just had with an executive last week who works for a large conglomerate. I, of course, will not mention the company's name, but they have done an RTO 5 days a week. And what's more, they issue reports about employees' badging activity in or out, and then send that to their direct supervisors once a week. And so it creates this atmosphere where people are saying they obviously don't trust us. It's a kind of, everyone's watching you with suspicion to determine if you're going to, toe the line on the 5 day a week return to office. And it's just tanked morale. It's tanked productivity. People are looking elsewhere for jobs where they're not going to be micromanaged like that. No adult human being wants to live like that. That's for when you were 5 years old. That's not how we treat adults. So some of these themes I think are really important. And I would just say, try it in a small way if you can, in a unit, in a geography, in a function. See how it goes, and keep the conversation open with your employees, or if you're running an experiment with your customers, keep the conversation open. Ask them for their ideas, because they've got lots of ideas. Oftentimes they're just waiting to be asked what they think will help make them more productive.
I love it. More variations on the theme of center humans, pilot and test, be willing to change. So it's great. Good examples. Good. Okay. So James, maybe this is, given our time, we're almost at the top of the hour. So maybe this will be our last question from the audience. What do you think about, this is from Michael, can prop techs really drive transformation of the real estate market? Do you see this as being fundamentally transformative?
So we're just going to pick a generic term across the entire real estate market. Nice. Okay. It depends. And that's not me sitting on the fence. It's, if you give me specifics, I can delve into this in different ways. I think that prop tech as a concept and as an idea has gone through a very rough period due to the fact of, for a million different reasons over the last few years, like with investment. I think a lot of prop tech companies out there are still struggling to figure themselves out from a return, to showcase the true return on investment. That's not to say that there isn't an immense amount of efficiencies that can be curated through different scenarios and different products that are out there. But I think it is specific use cases at different moments and across different assets as well. So that's a humongous question that literally I could spend the next 3 hours at. I'd love to.
And is something that we will spend hours on in the
course. It absolutely is. But here's the thing that, I, even here at MIT, at some of the top real estate leading minds will turn around to me, especially over the last few years, and they'll say, ultimately, look, what is all of this? It's just, what are we going to end up with? A load of sensors or something at the end of it. And they'll they just kind of cast you away with that kind of ideation, because they've seen a lot of, they've seen a lot of gimmicks. They've seen a lot of, things come and go over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And, real estate hasn't significantly changed all that much. Like, if you just take construction, for instance, me as a kid in the 1980s walking past a construction site, bar the foreman with maybe an iPad in his hand, what's really different from that construction site than the one you might walk past on the street corner today? And so there's a lot of questions as to, is technology making a difference? I think it's the teams that are out there that are utilizing it in the right way, that understand where it can really give you the greatest insights, are the ones that are supercharging themselves into a situation whereby, actually, I'm going to give an example. I'm going to example that I use all the time to come in other scenarios. There's a class here at MIT that I love. It's one of the best classes you can take within the Center for Real Estate. It's essentially real estate law. It's one of the hardest classes you take, and it's called Ventures. And it's a very hard class. It's a class that's a 12-credit class, and you are given somewhere between a 250 and 350 page legal document every 2 weeks to go and do a synopsis on. There's 6 or 7 questions. And you always get one of these these, we'll call it assignments in or around midterm. And I remember last year asking a student, I said quite simply, how are you? How's things? And usually at that time they're pale and they're upset and they're very much under pressure. And because they have midterms, which are very hard, and then they have one of these big assignments to hand in. And they said, I'm fine, I'm good. I said, how are you fine? How did the midterms go? Midterms went great. All right, well, what about this ventures homework? Oh yeah, done it. I said, how? It was really simple. I took the 350-page document, I fed it into ChatGPT. I asked it what were the 6 most important issues, and it spat out 5 of the answers I needed. I needed to tweak the 6th one. I did my own, I had to read it, of course, myself, go through it, curate the 6th answer. And the whole thing, what would have normally taken, in anyone else's case, up until that point, 12 hours, and I did it in about 25 minutes. Well, if you can take, that as an example and showcase that with different tasks that you do on a daily basis within the real estate industry or within anything, what you're doing is you're supercharging a lot of the things that you work on a daily basis. And so without something like that AI capability, what you're doing is you're pulling up to the traffic lights in a bicycle while your competitor is pulling up in a Porsche or a Ferrari. And that's really what you're kind of missing out on at this moment in time. So, can PropTechs really drive transformation? Absolutely, in specific tasks. And from that, formulating greater tasks and greater capabilities within that. But, it's all about finding its feet at this moment in time. There's some really, really great ones. And there's some maybe not so great ones as well.
Thanks, James. I have to say, one of the things I've loved about this conversation is that we've given a little bit of a taste about how intentionally we're trying to be very global and not US centric. I think that it fits really well with our lens, and the fact that we think these principles are applying globally. It makes me glad that our audience today has been so global. And that's definitely the way we've been designing this course. So let me just plug the course for a second. If you'd like to hear more and have a deeper dive on some of these topics, then please consider joining us for this upcoming course, Shaping the Future of Real Estate, Human, Digital, and Physical Innovation Strategy. Those are the 3 buckets that Kate was talking about. It's going to be a 6-day in-person course integrating insights from management and urban planning, technology, and design. And I'm going to do some finance as well, as Kate alluded to help leaders align their real estate strategies with emerging business leads. So we've really designed this to take the best of MIT and kind of project it into a real estate space and put it all together and deliver it. So this year it's going to be September 28th to October 3rd. You can visit our website, the ExecEd website, to learn more and to register. We hope to see you on campus. It's been great to have all of you here. We'll send out a recording by email to everyone that had registered for it, and the email will include some details on learning about the course as well. Kate, James, any last words?
I hope you come join us. You will have fun. You will learn about innovation. You will meet some new friends, and you will eat really well.
Awesome. Thanks.
Last words. I'm not saying that you're going to come out of this thinking that you can predict the future, but what you are going to end up with is, I think, the tools and the understanding that allows you to literally be able to just see a little bit around the corner. And that is something I think a lot of people in the real estate industry can get an awful lot of value out of.
I think there is a big element of casting your gaze up from narrowly just being terrified about where my feet are so I don't stumble, and being able to look towards the future and just be really deliberate and take advantage of being able to have that perspective forward facing. Great.
Exactly.
Thank you all for joining us. Take care.